Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from London, Canada for Reason to Resist on August 17th, 2026. Today we are going to be speaking with investigative journalist Vanessa Beeley, and the subject of our discussion will be Ukraine's deepening involvement in the US-Israeli dirty wars on the resistance in West Asia. But before we turn to that subject and I bring Vanessa into the conversation, I have a brief announcement to make. Several weeks ago, I was asked by anti-war activists in Toronto with whom I've been working and familiar for many years to give a speech tomorrow, August 18th in Toronto on the decline of the US empire. After I accepted their invitation, something that, by the way, I am not doing and generally do not do for any compensation, they secured a venue on College Street in downtown Toronto by the name of Free Time Cafe, and this was apparently a venue that they had secured in the past for similar events. Well, on Saturday, when I posted on X and other social media a notice that I was going to be speaking at that venue in Toronto tomorrow, Zionists went haywire and began to pressure the organization, or I should say the Free Time Cafe's owners, to cancel the event. And they did that within a matter of hours of having been subjected to this pressure, and did it, by the way, without ever affording me any opportunity whatsoever, even though I've been a member in good standing of the Bar of Ontario for over 30 years, to respond to these scurrilous allegations, whatever it may be. All I know in terms of their substance was it related to the old college try of all Zionists, namely that I am an alleged anti-Semite, which I, needless to say, categorically reject. In any case, we were then left with the task of having to find a new venue, and we have, and I'm just going to come back to that in a moment, but in the interim, we inquired with the owner of the cafe whether any organizations, Zionist organizations, had engaged in this pressure campaign, and the owner declined to share with us any information about who was behind it. But one of those organizations, blithely disclosed by posting on X a mocking statement that they were, in fact, behind this attempt to silence me and prevent me from speaking about the decline of the U.S. empire in Toronto. And the name of that organization is Tafsik. In the landscape of Canadian Zionist organizations, it's relatively new. It is also extremely fanatic. It's small, but it is very aggressive, and frankly, the management of the organization is not particularly competent. How do I know this? I know this because I am familiar with various legal proceedings they have brought, one of which was to stop Toronto City Hall from raising the Palestinian flag a few months ago. I covered this on this program, in fact. They sought an emergency injunction from a judge in Toronto, and my colleague, an outstanding lawyer, criminal defense lawyer by the name of Shane Martinez, opposed them in that application, and they were crushed by the judge. So much so that, in fact, he ordered them, as you can see here, to pay $3,500 in costs for their failed attempt to halt the flag raising. Now, as incompetent as they may be and as aggressive and as fanatical as they are, sometimes they manage to pressure small businesses into doing these sorts of things. So I just want to say that the venue that we have secured tomorrow is the Taco establishment at 319 Augusta Avenue, just south of College Street in downtown Toronto, which is just a short walk away, by the way, from the Free Time Cafe. Now, with that, let's turn to the main topic of our report today: Ukraine's involvement in the U.S. and Israeli dirty wars on the resistance in West Asia. Now, back in 2022, when Russia's special military operation, as the Russian government calls it, began in Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was instantly catapulted to rock star status across the West. Western leaders and corporate media outlets proclaimed him to be the Churchill of our time. And this is just one of many articles I can find in the corporate media which liken Zelensky to Churchill. This one, published by the ultra neocon, because that's what it is, folks, The Guardian, in December of 2022. And week after week, not only was he being lauded as a hero of historic proportions for having accomplished nothing, frankly, by governments around the West and the corporate media, but in addition, he was being feted in one national parliament, legislature, the Congress of the United States, week after week after week, where routinely he was given rapturous standing ovations. For example, this one here in March of 2022 conferred upon him by the British Parliament, and I'm quite sure that that's only one of many standing ovations that these neocons have conferred upon Volodymyr Zelensky over the intervening years. Now, Zelensky's most ardent fans were not only the neocons. To my chagrin, many Westerners who regard themselves as left-leaning and anti-war also fell in love with Zelensky. Now, from the outset, I was highly skeptical of the deification of Volodymyr Zelensky, and I made no bones about it in my public commentary. And I'll show you one example of that. In July 2022, I authored a long expose on Zelensky, published it on my website, dimitrilascaris.org. And as you can see here, it was titled Ukraine Servant of the People is a Western Fiction. Servant of the People, of course, is a reference to the role that he played. This was a television series in Ukraine, a comedic television series in which he played the role of an anti-corruption hero who was a simple teacher and somehow rose to the level of the presidency. Yes, folks, that was actually the role that Zelensky played before he went from being a comedian to being the president of Ukraine without ever having held elected office, ever, and really having no experience whatsoever in government, macroeconomic matters, or military matters for that matter. So the essential thesis of my article and my overall commentary all the way back in 2022 about Zelensky is that, first of all, there was ample evidence that he was hopelessly corrupt. Secondly, he was grotesquely unqualified for the job. And thirdly, he was an autocrat. As I pointed out in this article, the government under Zelensky had shut down the largest opposition party, banned the largest opposition party in the Ukrainian parliament, closed down a number of other political parties, banned them, and also shut down television stations and newspapers that were sympathetic to the political opposition of Zelensky. And now here we are, some 2 years later, more than 4 years later, since the deification of Zelensky began, and he's still in office, but not by the mandate of the Ukrainian people. His mandate expired in May 2024, more than 2 years ago, and he rules today by martial law. And he has absolutely no interest whatsoever in holding an election anytime soon. Not only that, but he has been dogged by serious allegations of credibility, I should say of corruption, and a number of his close associates have in fact been charged with corruption, and some of them have been jailed. Now, my critique of Zelensky at the time encountered a significant degree of pushback from people who identify as left-wing and anti-war here in Canada, also in Europe. And some of these people had been, prior to that time, supportive of my advocacy and my work as a journalist, as a political candidate, but they became mighty hostile when I began to vigorously criticize Volodymyr Zelensky. In response to these critiques, I sometimes pointed out that to these people, all of whom I understood to be supporters of the Palestinian cause, that Zelensky repeatedly told the world that he wanted Ukraine to become a big Israel. And in fact, in April 2022, a neocon at the ultimate of neocon, think tanks, the Atlantic Council, wrote an article in which he offered his advice to Zelensky about how he could convert Ukraine into a big Israel. Now, if Zelensky was such a hero of democracy and human rights, why would he proclaim his objective to be to turn Ukraine into a larger version of an apartheid genocidal state? And he has continued to unfailingly support Israel throughout the almost 3 years of genocide that we have witnessed. And one other point I want to make in this regard, since I'm on the subject of Israel, is that last week Ukrainian media reported that Ukraine's anti-corruption authorities are still waiting for the Israeli regime to respond to a Ukrainian request that this character be extradited from Israel to Ukraine. Who is this character? This character was Zelensky's business partner for many years. His name is Timur Mindich. And a few months ago, when he was on the verge of being arrested by Ukrainian anti-corruption authorities, he fled Ukraine to Israel and has pretty much disappeared ever since, although it is known that he's in the country. Personally, I think there's little chance that he is going to be extradited soon, if ever. And I imagine that Zelensky would be perfectly happy for him to remain in Israel, because after all, he may have a lot of dirty laundry to expose when it comes to his former business partner, Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, in any case, Zelensky's wish for Ukraine to become a big Israel appears to have come true in many respects. And some of that is what we're going to be discussing today with Vanessa Beeley. So why don't we bring her into the conversation now? Hi, Vanessa. How you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Dimitri. Nice to be with you again.
So just for those few members of our audience who might not know Vanessa, she's a British investigative journalist and activist, anti-war activist, and I understand you're based nowadays in Beirut, Lebanon. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is, since the fall of Syria.
Well, it appears you've been keeping safe, and we're definitely thankful for that. So I want to begin, Vanessa, by talking about the article that you published on your Substack earlier this month. And I'll just put the headline of it up on the screen. It's titled "The Phantom Proxy: How the West Delegated the Dirty War in West Asia to Ukraine. More details on Ukrainian intelligence operations in West Asia in support of the U.S. Zionist war against Iran and the resistance axis." And in your article at the outset, you wrote as follows: "The tectonic geopolitical shifts that have been triggered by the NATO war against Russia and Ukraine have apparently introduced a new operational strategy into the traditional mix. The collective West is faced with an increased domestic economic and political fatigue, international law constraints, and the simmering risk of direct escalation with either Moscow or Tehran and Iran's ring of fire. The Western intelligence agencies in Israel have come up with the perfect alternative that provides a convenient shadow war and full plausible deniability, delegating highly sensitive and deniable operations to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Kiev has become the ideal global asymmetric proxy, the global agent of chaos for the U.S. alliance." You then explained, Vanessa, that Ukrainian forces appear to be popping up at various locations in West Asia and several of the more devastated conflict zones. And the one you focused on first was Syria. Could you tell us more about what Ukrainian forces and other elements of the Ukrainian intelligence apparatus have been doing in Syria in recent months?
Well, I think it's also important to point out, and I know we've discussed this previously, Dimitri, that this is also an extension of the war against Russia. And in fact, the Ukrainians, which by the way are trained in the UK and have been since 2022, more than 62,000 Ukrainian special forces have been trained in the UK to a cost of 7 billion under Operation Interflex. Previously, it was Operation Orbital, which was conducted on Ukrainian territory, but it's now been exported to the UK. But in 2023, basically, the Ukrainian special forces kind of popped up in Syria. They carried out attacks, particularly against Russian bases and facilities, particularly around Aleppo in 2024, which of course was leading up to the advance of the Al-Qaeda / HTS forces against Aleppo. So just leading up to that, they hit Queres airbase close to Aleppo, where Russia had a drone facility and tech base. But they also hit Russia in the Golan Heights, in particular in 2023. They were also present in the northeast I believe, training the Kurdish separatist forces there in drone technology. Also, we can come on to that in relation to Iran, of course. And then basically leading up to the HTS offensive at the end of November 2024, we knew that Kirilo Budanov, the head of the Defense Intelligence, the GUR, was effectively ensuring that Jolani's militia were trained in drone technology, were trained in the capability to actually produce drones themselves. And at the same time, he was kind of siphoning Al-Qaeda militia into Ukraine to fight against Russia. So it was a very kind of symbiotic relationship between, at that point, Ukraine and Jolani in Idlib. And that, of course, we know the history there. One of the main reasons, there are multiple reasons, but one of the reasons the Syrian Arab Army was so overwhelmed was because of the use of drones by both Turkey, or supplied by Turkey, and the Ukrainian drone tech that had been given to Jolani, which was largely, I would say, unexpected, and certainly unexpected in the saturation of drone strikes that were carried out by HTS in their advance from to Aleppo and then from Aleppo towards Damascus. But now, fast forward to today, and according to reports that I'm receiving from very good sources that are still inside Syria, the Ukrainian special forces are building up again, very much alongside the Turkish military, which again now is expanding into the coastal areas, particularly in the northern coastal areas in Latakia, but also stretching down into Tartus. The Ukrainian forces were originally only in Latakia and Tartus. Now they have expanded into the Homs area, which of course is very close to the border with Lebanon, the eastern border of Lebanon with Syria. And there they've effectively established, again, according to my sources that I do very much rely on, and I trust their information, 3 bases. One for monitoring the border itself and preventing any weapons getting through from Iraq through Syria and into Lebanon. But also just simply monitoring the movements of the resistance and Lebanese armed forces on that eastern border in Lebanon. Another drone technology base where they are manufacturing drones, where they are training Jolani's forces in the use of drones, but also, again, the manufacture of drones. And at the same time, Turkey has established the HTRS-100, if I'm correct, their surveillance radar, which apparently can scan both Israel and Lebanon. Israel has been sort of complaining about it. But what I find quite interesting, Dimitri, is that prior to this point, Israel had bombed any attempt of Turkey's to expand into areas in central Syria. If you remember, Israel bombed as soon as Turkey tried to establish air defenses in around the former T4 area in Palmyra and in Palmyra itself. They were bombed. Now, Israel is complaining at the moment, but it's not taking direct action to prevent it. And in my opinion, that's because at the moment it serves their purpose for Turkey to advance, and also for Turkey to give the green light to the Turkish proxies within Jolani's militia. This has been an ongoing battle, which I think Trump tried to resolve at the NATO summit in Ankara when he made guarantees. In my opinion, it wasn't only about the F-35s. I think that was a bit of a smokescreen. I think he gave Turkey the guarantees that they would maintain a sphere of influence in northern Lebanon, in Tripoli, which is part of the maritime corridor that Erdogan wants to take control of in the eastern Mediterranean. And so, from this perspective, in my opinion, Israel is allowing Turkey this expansion at the moment because it serves their agenda to weaken Hezbollah. Of course, Iran has threatened Jolani with the bombing of 100 strategic sites in Syria should Jolani move against Lebanon. So for the moment, according to people that I'm talking to, it's kind of he's backtracked slightly, but they're still building up forces and surveillance and radar and drone facilities and so on. So clearly it's been put on the back burner for now. But as I said at the end of my article, I think it's still very much an active threat.
So if you could summarize in a few words, and don't feel limited to a few words.
I'll try.
What do you think the overall, I mean, obviously these Ukrainian forces are not going to be active in Syria without the approval and even the direction of its Western backers, principally Washington. So what do you think overall Washington's objective is in deploying or assigning Ukrainians so these tasks within Syria?
Well, because it gives them complete plausible deniability, sorry. And at the same time, Jolani, as far as I understand, made it very clear that he needed a guarantee of air cover if he were to conduct any operations, whether it's to create a buffer zone on the Lebanese eastern border in the mountain ranges there where Hezbollah stores a lot of its weapons and missiles and so on, or whether it is going to be a series of incursions into Lebanon, perhaps through the various Sunni extremists that are in the north, for example. There are multiple ways that he could potentially carry out an operation to weaken Hezbollah's capability in Lebanon. But as far as I understand from what people have told me, he told Trump, I'm not going to do it without air cover. You know, that would be insane. And so therefore the US can't provide direct air cover, because then it would be very obvious what they're doing. They could be held to account under international law. I mean, we both know that that's very unlikely, but nevertheless, they don't want to create such an uproar, potential uproar in the international community. So therefore, Ukraine is easy. They can send in the special forces to basically conduct operations on behalf of the United States alliance, which includes Israel.
But if your suggestion is that they would be providing air cover, how would they do that? Through drone warfare?
Through the drones. Yeah, through the drones and through the radar and surveillance. Right. Because the surveillance can provide real-time imagery back to Jolani's forces, which he used during the attack on Aleppo, and you know, provide Jolani with the sense of air cover where they can see where Hezbollah are about to launch drones or missiles and so on.
And in your view, notwithstanding the threats from Iran, do you think that the likelihood is that eventually these terrorists will invade Lebanon?
I'm not sure if it'll be a full-on invasion. I'm not sure that Jolani is as suicidal as that. At the same time, he does need to get rid of some of the foreign mercenaries, the Chechens, the Uyghurs, the Uzbekistanis, and so on. And so potentially he might launch some kind of operation in order for them to be sacrificed in some kind of operation against Lebanon. So I'm not ruling it out. And what I am being told is, well, at the moment he has stood down. The 84th Division, which is effectively largely under the control of Turkey, is continuing deployment and build-up on the border of Lebanon. And at the same time, in the last 2 days, he's been sending forces at the behest or the request of Turkey to the eastern border with Iraq, which to me suggests that this was done also in collusion with al-Zaidi, the US captured Iraqi prime minister. I think this is also to try and secure the border against potential Iraqi resistance insurgent if Jolani carries out operations. So, as I said, while it's on the back burner, we all know that these things can erupt at any moment. We've got elections coming up in the US and in Israel. And I think there is high potential for serious escalation in this region. And as I said, it's not only against Iran and the resistance axis. Russia is also involved in the use of Ukrainian mercenaries or Ukrainian proxies against their interests in the region, but also in Africa.
Just to be clear, it sounded like you said, I don't think this is what you meant, that the Russians are using Ukrainian proxies, but I think you meant they're being used against Russia's interests. Right.
Yes, okay. Sorry, my apologies.
No worries. So you did mention Iraq, and this is certainly, you paid significant attention to that in your article on August 6th. Could you tell us what you understand the Ukrainians to be up to in Iraq?
Yes, I think we can start with the Iranian bombing of the US base at Al Tanaf, which was an unlawful US military base, one of the biggest that they had inside Syria, that straddles Jordan, Iraq, and Syria, and from which the ISIS launched multiple attacks against Syrian civilians and military, and also against Russian positions. The bombing of Al Tanaf by Iran was actually based on intelligence from Russia that there were Ukrainian special forces airdropped in alongside the US special forces. Mm-hmm. So that's just an indication. The idea was for them to head to the Iraqi Kurdistan area, where they could provide, again, drone technology and warfare expertise to the Kurdish separatists there that are every now and then trying to attempt a ground invasion into Iran. Of course, they have been successfully prevented from doing so. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the Ukrainian special forces have been tasked with carrying out false flag attacks inside Iraq, and there has been a full documented report on this and of the arrest of Ukrainian intelligence agents inside Iraq by the Iraqi security minister. But the idea was to carry out attacks against Iraqi state installations and infrastructure, and then have it blamed on the Iraqi resistance, which of course is described as being a proxy of Iran. In reality, it's simply an ally of Iran that battled against ISIS when the US was not providing any weapons for them to actually fight against ISIS. Iran provided them with the capability to actually prevent the invasion of Baghdad by ISIS, if we go back to when Syria was still standing. Mm-hmm. And so basically that's their role, is to create internal strife and conflict within Iraq, to deflect the focus of the resistance against Syria, and to turn them inwards, in other words, and prevent the capability of being able to actually do anything against Jolani. And I think it's also important to mention there's an estimated 70,000 former Syrian Arab Army soldiers inside Iraq that are also poised, of course, to take part in any operations against Jolani should he make a move against Lebanon.
Now, an obvious question, in fact, it's one that a commenter on one of our recent reports raised, is given the enormous losses that the Ukrainian military has sustained, and we've all seen, those of us who care to look, the videos of men being hauled off the streets, brutally abducted by forces of the Ukrainian military and sent off for perfunctory training and then the front line. This is something that's now been well established. There is a certain level of desperation in the Ukrainian military to man the front line. And so it seems odd that they would be committing forces to West Asia. What do you think this says about the priorities of Zelensky and his backers in the West?
Yeah, well, I think it's also important to note that when the SMO began in 2022, they actually started recalling the special forces from particularly Africa, because they had been deployed even prior to 2022 to disrupt Russian interests in those regions, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, as far as I understand, it's not big numbers, but what they are, of course, are highly trained experts in particularly the drone warfare, which is also now being exported since the aggression against Iran that began at the end of February this year. It's now also being exported to the Zionist Arab Persian Gulf states, so to the UAE, also to Jordan, of course, which has been or was recently under very heavy attack from Iran. So they're working in the entire pro-Israeli arena, basically, with regards to Iran, while also carrying out these destabilization campaigns against the Africa Corps, or as they used to be known, the Wagner Group, that are operating largely now in Africa. They left Syria in around 2023.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the priority of the West in terms of how it deploys its Ukrainian proxies is essentially to wreak havoc everywhere and anywhere with respect to anybody, any force, any state that refuses to submit to U.S. hegemony. I mean, it's and the Ukrainians seem only too happy to offer themselves up for that purpose. Now, one of the more unusual incidents in recent weeks, and you talk about this in your article, Vanessa, was this attack by Ukraine on a vessel, an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. And that reportedly killed and wounded members of the crew, whom, if I recall correctly, were Iranian. This elicited a sharp response, understandably so, from the Iranian government, and it was a pretty direct threat to make Ukraine pay in some manner for what it had done. And then there was a call, I believe it was between the foreign ministers, and all of a sudden Ukraine became apologetic, publicly so.
It was unintentional.
Well, and the Iranian government seemed to be satisfied with the apologetic tenor of the response. What do you make of all of this? What was that all about?
I honestly think, I think Iran understood that it was a trap. I think the intention was to draw Iran into a wider conflict against particularly the EU. If you remember, there was also that weird claim of a drone strike. Which port was it? Is it Damietta in Egypt, when the two vessels caught fire? And when Egypt was actually saying it began with an engine room fire and then it spread to another ship, Israel immediately was saying, no, it has to be Iran, or it has to be Ansarullah, or the Houthis as they call them. So I think Iran recognized the fact very quickly that this was a trap. And I think Zelensky's reaction, I think because this was a kind of probe to see what the reaction would be, I think Zelensky was given instructions to also stand down, basically, at this point. I think the point was made that Ukraine can target vessels in what was formerly considered a safe zone of interchange between Iran and Russia. Oddly enough, Israel targeted on the Caspian coast back in March 2026, and that's actually mentioned in the Institute for National Security Studies, I think it is, in Tel Aviv. They say it's not related, but do we actually believe that when, Israel has been intrinsically linked to the 2014 coup, and then afterwards in supporting Ukrainian forces against Russia. So for me, I think it was a bit of a test run. And I think it was also a threat to Russia. I think it was also saying to Russia, look, we can also attack you here. We can prevent the supply of drone components and drones from Iran to Russia, which are essential, actually, in Russia's war against Ukraine. And so I think that's what that was largely about. It was a message, and the message was sent 3 days before Zelensky met with President Trump. And at the same time, Zelensky started the rumor that, he launched the rumor that Russia was supplying intelligence to Iran to target American bases and so on. That came from Zelensky at the same time as he carried out that attack.
Now, recently, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, not the sharpest tool in the shed, came out and said they're going to cut off all trade with Iran, whether it's land-based, sea-based, whatever. And whether or not this is achievable is one question, but if in fact they're serious about pursuing that objective, they're going to have to deal with the Caspian Sea, because there is a lot of trade between the Russian Federation and Iran through the Caspian Sea. So what do you think they're going to do to try to bring an end to that? I mean, if they're not going to use Ukraine to attack vessels, and by the way, I just want to step back for a second. I entertained the possibility at the time that we heard about this attack, and I still am prepared to contemplate this as a possibility. I'm not saying this is what happened, but that the drone attack actually occurred from the territory of a state that borders on, that has a coastline on the Caspian Sea.
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah.
And they just basically used Zelensky to cover up where the true source of the drone, because the true source of the drone was very worried about Iran's reaction. And the number one candidate in my mind would be Azerbaijan. But yeah. I invite you to comment on that, but also more broadly, what do you think the plan might be for cutting off trade between Russia and Iran through the Caspian Sea?
Oh, I think it's extremely possible that they're going to try and do that. And again, that is part of putting pressure on Russia in the South Caucasus. I mean, you and I talked about this fairly recently, but Russia, to a large degree, I think partly because it overextended itself in Ukraine, and it had to let a number of its other interests basically drop, including Syria, but also Armenia, which then enabled the takeover of Armenian territory by Azerbaijan and by Aliyev. And it opened the doors to EU, particularly France, Washington influence, Trump's influence. I mean, Trump is brokering the peace now between Armenia and Azerbaijan, although he can't pronounce Azerbaijan at all, but never mind, he calls it Azerbaijan. So basically, that's the problem. Russia's withdrawal to some degree opened the floodgates for enemy influence in the South Caucasus, which is high risk to Russia. And what is now happening is the South Caucasus countries are saying, well, okay, we can't depend on Russia. So they're turning to China, to the EU, to Israel. Israel is supplying weapons into Azerbaijan. Israel and Washington have control of the Zangezur corridor, which borders Iran, of course. And Russia is forced to kind of relocate the North-South trade corridor to Afghanistan. So it's negotiating with the Taliban there for that. Mm-hmm. So I think there is potential for, and also I should bring Turkey into that mix, because Turkey is also has interests in the middle corridor, which bypasses Russia, and the Caspian Sea is part of that middle corridor. So I think it's extremely likely that both Russia and Iran will come under attack, increasingly so, in the Caspian Sea at some point. Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with you if that's what you were saying. I think it's a high risk area for them now, whereas previously it was known to be a safe zone historically for them.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if they don't escalate in the Caspian Sea. Mm. But that's obviously a more complicated task because of the politics of that area and the needs of these various statelets like Azerbaijan that are very vulnerable. In any case, I want to talk to you now, move on from the subject of Ukrainian activities in West Asia and talk to you about this much ballyhooed Mecca Defence Pact. And you and I had an opportunity yesterday on Matthew Aaron's show to talk about this, but we haven't talked about it with you on this program. And I'm bringing it up because something just happened, which I think is relevant to the analysis about what this organization is trying to achieve. When it was first announced on August 7th, I spent a lot of time looking around for commentary from authorized officials of the Trump regime about what they thought about this whole thing, right? And they were oddly silent. And there kind of are two schools of thought about the Mecca Defense Pact in the alternative media amongst people who are, committed to anti-imperialism. There seems to be two schools of thought. One school of thought is that this is a response the coming together of Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey in a mutual defense alliance is a response to U.S. and particularly Israeli aggression. And these states are now stepping up to the plate and becoming more assertive and trying to put a check on Israeli expansionism. And one of the persons, with all due respect to him, who has articulated this view is David Hirsch over at Middle East Eye. And you can see this is an article he wrote on August 10th, Why the Mecca Agreement is a Necessary Show of Force. American weakness has prompted this reshaping of the Middle East order, with the three biggest regional powers choosing to break the cycle of colonial domination by Israel. Now, David does a lot of good reporting. I would very much like for this to be true, but I'm quite skeptical about it. And for me, one indicator of the true purpose of this is, what is the American government's reaction? Well, we got an answer to that yesterday. Trump put out, finally, after days of silence, this post on Truth Social. Very happy to see that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan recently and finally signed the Mecca Defence Agreement. It shows how the Middle East is coming together and how countries will finally be able to defend themselves in a more meaningful way. Congratulations to the great leadership of the three nations mentioned. This is a big, bold, and an important first step. Wow. Now, call me a cynic, Vanessa, but it's hard for me to believe that Trump would be reacting this way if this was meant to check American aggression and Israeli expansionism in West Asia. What's your view about all of this?
No, definitely not. I mean, as I've said before, and actually you pointed out the fact that there have been polls in Pakistan and Turkey demonstrating that the majority of the populations are not only against the aggression against Iran, but also are actually pushing for both countries to enter the war in solidarity with Iran. It's extremely confusing because there is already a defense pact between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, an official one, and there is an actual document signed laying out the contents of the agreement, etc. Right? So that's already in existence. So what is the necessity of this fanfared agreement that has no documentation? No one in any of the three countries has any idea what they've just signed up to, right? I mean, this is slightly insane, in my opinion, because what does it actually mean? And is it performative? Is it some kind of performative message to Iran saying, this is a Sunni Muslim alliance that will stand in defiance of any Iranian expansionism in the region? Because that has, of course, always been Turkey's big problem and Saudi Arabia's big problem, that they don't want Iranian influence in the West Asia region. That is one reason that the regime change war in Syria was started in 2011, very much backed by Saudi Arabia. I have been thinking about it, and I'd like to kind of get your opinion as well, because I'm still working this out in my own mind. I think this benefits Turkey because, as I said, there's already an existing agreement between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. So why do they need to create another agreement? It's the inclusion of Turkey that, for me, is very interesting, because at some point, Turkey is going to come into conflict with Israel. That is inevitable, because the neo-Ottoman ambitions of Erdogan are already clashing with Israel. Even in the north of Lebanon, for example, Israel wants control of the north of Lebanon to connect with Cyprus and Greece and Europe, where it's expanding its capture of states and entities there, right? Greece and Cyprus are pretty much totally in bed with Israel, and already in Cyprus that is in competition with Turkey, with the territory that is occupied by Turkey, right? So I think ultimately Turkey is trying to secure guarantees that when that point comes, it's going to have the support of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. That's just my reading of this. The fact also that Turkey is expanding its resource interests into Kirkuk in northern Iraq It has now a seat on the BP board there that is developing the oil interest or the oil fields in northern Iraq. That ties into the Kirkuk-Banyas pipeline, which is going to take about 4 years to... Banyas, of course, is in Syria. That's going to take about 4 years to complete. It's going to cost around 15 billion. I'm almost certain that Saudi Arabia is putting the financing into that as part of its investment in Syria. I could be wrong. So I think this is about Turkey protecting its own expansionism and remembering that Turkey is a NATO member state also.
I think that's a perfectly plausible explanation, and I have to confess I don't know myself.
I don't know. I'm just kind of like
yeah. I mean, you may well be right, and I can certainly see the force of that argument because, of course, of the three of them, the only one that has a nuclear arsenal is Pakistan, and Israel has a nuclear arsenal, as we all know, and is the most likely to use it. Those child murdering lunatics are perfectly capable of such an insanity. So having this defense alliance is certainly some level of deterrence to Israel to use nuclear weapons on Turkey if and when that conflict comes. And also there's stature. There's a certain level of amount of stature that is enhanced because they're in this agreement with, the Saudis and the Pakistanis. But other than that, what do they get from being in the military alliance with Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia has an army that is tiny.
Well, it's mostly Pakistani because Pakistan has been sending special forces to Saudi Arabia for some time. So, I mean, the other thing that also is a potential issue is Saudi Arabia is pretty vulnerable internally because there are still elements of resistance within the western provinces and the southern provinces. And many elements that are pro-Palestine, for example. So all of these Zionist Arab Persian Gulf countries are at risk of internal destabilization, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at Bahrain. So I think that's also coming into the mix. What I find quite interesting is I think Qatar refused to join, which is very interesting because Qatar is extremely close to Turkey. And between them and Syria, they perceive Syria becoming very much a Turkish protectorate and Turkey being the leader of the Muslim world, of course, meaning the Sunni Muslim world. And that's one of the reasons that they've called it, in my opinion, the Mecca Pact, because they're appropriating, the pilgrimage holy site for a Sunni Islamic alliance here. Now, what's interesting, as I said, Qatar, I think, refused to join at the moment. Egypt backed off, which is also quite interesting for me. I think I'm still working my way through it. It's still a bit of an anomaly for me. I'm not quite sure, but I certainly don't see it as a positive move for the region as regards the resistance.
Right. So would you agree that it's very unlikely to be designed to check American aggression in the region?
Sorry, I'm sorry to laugh, but no, I think that's sort of a bit insane. And I think Trump's post on Truth Social kind of bears out our argument on that.
Right. Well, one way or
Israel
another.
Commented on it, by the way. I haven't actually looked.
I haven't seen an official statement from.
No, which again is odd. If it were a threat, they would be already dictating terms.
I do understand that some sort of lower level officials or commentators in Israel have said in the media that they're concerned about this, but I haven't seen an official condemnation of it. And in fact, now you reminded me, there is something else I definitely want to ask you about in that regard, and that is the Turkish foreign minister, Fidan, has put out some kind of an ultimatum to Israel that if they don't withdraw from Gaza, Turkey is going to take radical action. Were you aware of that, Vanessa?
Yes. This is just, I mean, if we learned one thing And surprisingly, well, I think Russia has learned it, but I think they're so incredibly dependent on Turkey from so many perspectives is that it's very difficult for them to do anything about it. But, you know, Turkish statements are total snake statements. I don't put any store in them whatsoever. Because Turkey has been facilitating the genocide in Gaza. It's been allowing the supply of oil and metals for the armament industry in the occupied territories since October the 7th. So, in my opinion, it's kind of meaningless. And what are they going to do?
Yeah.
You know?
My reaction when I saw this was, show me the money. Unless and until there's any kind of meaningful action to back this up, I think we shouldn't attach any weight to it whatsoever.
None. I mean, what they haven't done anything since October the 7th. They haven't done anything previously except performative statements and rhetoric, hyperbole, and nothing has actually happened. They've continued to support and facilitate the Israeli expansionism in the region.
They wouldn't even provide a naval accompaniment to the flotilla, the humanitarian flotilla to Gaza. You would have thought that at least they could do that.
Exactly.
So remarkable.
Yeah.
Well, always a great pleasure talking to you, Vanessa. Thank you very much for joining us. And I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Take care.
Thank you. We're signing off today from Beirut in London, Canada on August 17th, 2026.